How you doing, Travis? Can you hear me?
Good evening.
Hey, good. After all this confusion, we're finally on. Oh, and by the way, I finally figured out the whole Arizona versus Eastern time zone thing. You guys were 2 hours. Well, you are 2 hours now behind us. That happened when daylight savings ended in at the beginning of November. During the summer months when you guys never actually did daylight savings in March, that's when you guys were 3 hours behind us, but you got 2 hours behind us when we had daylight savings in November. So that's how you and I got confused about the start time. But now that we got that out of the way, let's let bygones be bygones. And well, like I said, I wanted to give you a full 2 hours of talking time on this show. We don't have to go that long. I've come to the realization the reason my show doesn't get as many listeners as it possibly could is because I go 2 hours and people have lousy attention spans, and that costs me potential listeners. So it's not my fault; it's people's fault with their lousy attention spans and all. But an interesting guest like you can certainly solve that problem because even though the story of Travis Walton, like the story of Roswell, is something that many UFO and ET researchers may consider to be preaching to the choir because it's a story that comes up a lot more relative to other UFO and ET stories. It's a story that never is going to get old, and it's definitely more interesting when the person involved with the close encounter is the one telling the experience and is the one preaching to the choir to all the people, even some people at the MUFON conference that I was at in Langhorne a couple months ago said it was a lot different listening to Travis give his story. I mean, he regurgitated everything all the other researchers of the case have said, but simply listening to him was a lot different. And well, yeah, I definitely agree with those people. I'm sure even after listening to you now, I'll be thinking the same thing. So while this is certainly a story a lot of people have heard, we aren't going to have much of an interview, of course, if I don't give you the chance to introduce yourself and tell your life story and tell the whole experience that you had from well, you could tell an abridged version if you want. I mean, we only got 2 hours, and I'm sure if you did every single nook and cranny of the whole experience, it would even take longer than that. But by all means, get the important info out, and no, I'm not going to interrupt you at all. You got the floor, and then afterwards, I do have some questions prepared, and some questions I'm sure will come up. I'll keep my notepad handy. So, Travis Walton, who are you? What do you do? Tell us about your experience and anything else in your life that you feel is worth getting out.
Well, in 1975, I was a 22-year-old laborer. I was a logger working in the woods, and I was working with a crew of six other men, and we had spent a day cutting trees and packed up our equipment and headed out, and we saw a glow coming through the trees, uh, and it was definitely something out of the ordinary. It was starting to get dark, and normally you don't see any lights in the woods. So I was thinking that maybe there could be a vehicle down over the hill with the lights pointing up into the trees, or could there be hunters? It was deer hunting season. We'd been hearing shots during the day. Maybe some campers up there, but the light was from higher than where the crest of the hill would be, and you can only estimate that because the tree growth up there, that point was too thick to see. We hadn't cut that part of the contract yet, so it was kind of just gradually, something the crew came aware of. At first, it was probably just me or maybe somebody else, and then one by one, everybody was looking there, and it was just a curiosity at first, and then I said, Mike, hurry up, get up there, let's see what it is, because you could see where there was a light shining onto the road, so there was probably a break in the trees. And when we got up there, uh, boom, there it was. I yelled at Mike to stop the truck, but one of the guys in the back, I think it was Alan, yelled out, "It's a flying saucer or it's a spaceship!" right away. I mean, it wasn't anything you had to wonder what is that. It was just this glowing disc hovering there less than 100 feet away, and was quite a shocking thing. Uh, Even as the truck stopped, I threw open the door and was getting out, just thinking it would be gone before I took more than a couple of steps, you know. But closer I got, I could see it wasn't taking off as I had assumed. Um, very often when we're driving through the woods, you know spot an animal, and if you call for the others to look, they're lucky if they turn quick enough to see it. So this turned out not to be the case, and I, my better sense and my fear started to take hold. So I slowed my approach, but I got up to where I was looking up at probably about a 45-degree angle, and it was just amazing. This is something the other guys, even in the truck could see. They were just astonished at the beauty and perfection of it. The glow was like ethereal, it lit up the whole clearing with this sort of a strange sort of a light that was kind of there and not there at the same time. It was kind of a weird effect. If you've ever, been looking at the television screen and you can see the pictures that are on there, but the light coming in the window puts a reflection on the screen, so you can actually see the light from the TV and the light from the reflection at the same time. And this thing was so glossy, so smooth and perfect that it was kind of like that. You could see a reflection of the surrounding trees, even though it was glowing. But I didn't have a whole lot of time to sit there and ponder it, because the sound it was making suddenly got louder and it started to move. And I was already pretty scared, but that just kind of instinctively, just the instant I heard it get louder and saw it move, I just jumped for cover. And there was a pile of logging debris in the middle of the clearing, big logs sticking up, and I just got down behind that. And, I don't remember now whether they were, I think they had already been yelling at me to get back in the truck, get away from there. But, I didn't need to be told, because I was just, kind of torn between staying in my little hiding place behind the log and, running back to the truck and being more in the open in the process, So, but I decided to run back to the truck. They were, actually pretty anxious. They were yelling at me, cussing at me to get away from there and get back in the truck. So I raised up to go, and at that point I felt this shock, a numbing sort of a electrocution sort of a feeling. It was at that point, because the cover, the log, was down and forward. When I stood up, that brought my body at the closest to the craft that had been. And it was at that point that this energy hit me. And rather than, as I thought might be the possibility at the time, that that something had been fired at me, it might have just been some sort of a discharge, because I'd closed the distance like a giant spark. The crew described the energy, and I have to go by what they saw, because I was just knocked unconscious instantly. One of the deputies wrote a report that the crewman that he had interviewed described it as looking like a beam, a laser beam, maybe a foot wide, blasting out of there and hitting me. But other guys had described it as looking like a long blue flame. Whatever it was, like a bolt of lightning or a laser beam or whatever, they said it was so powerful that it just threw me through the air. You know, I've heard different descriptions. They said 10, 15, 20 feet. But it threw me through the air to where I fell limp like a rag doll. John said it was like it was a sack of meat, like there was not a bone left in my body. And as soon as they saw that, they figured they were next, and they took off. Now, I always try to, at this point in the retelling of this, try to emphasize that was not a cowardly thing to do at all. They've been criticized, and people have actually said it to them, and I thought it was unfair. You know, my family, you know, when I was missing, they were, you know, looking for somebody to blame. You know, and you lose somebody, and they're blaming law enforcement, they're blaming the crew, and you know, but when they took off and dang near wrecked the truck like a mad dash through some very rough terrain, and they said when they got up there, they got out and were arguing about what to do. It was really weird. They were saying that they were going to build a campfire, you know, to stay warm by or something. It was, of course, they broke off with that plan when they saw some deer hunters pass by on the main road up ahead. So they jumped back in the truck and they took off and tried to catch the deer hunters, thinking, you know, we'll get somebody with some guns. And then, because even at that point they were, you know, at least Mike was thinking that better go back and check and see if, you know, I needed help or, you know, any emergency medical situation, you know. But when they couldn't catch the deer hunters, they turned around to go back. Now in the movie, when Mike says, you know, this truck's going back and anybody that doesn't want to go can get out and wait here. In the movie, all the crew got out and Mike went back alone. I think that was some kind of a story device where they were trying to accentuate the suspicion that there was some kind of a murder or something. I don't understand that. Nobody volunteered to get out and stand alone in the dark and wait for Mike to come back, even though some of them didn't want to go back at all, and they were saying, let's go back to town first, get more help. They were at least going to stay with the truck and the relative safety of the group. And so as they were driving back, they were arguing about, you know, was I alive? You know, was I even in one piece? You know, they were talking about it having disintegrated me or knocked me into pieces. But they were, you know, some of them, you know, got the upper hand in that argument and was saying, no, he was in one piece. But it was really very, you know, Kenny was saying that his greatest fear was not that the aliens were still hanging around, because as they were driving up, they saw it rise up and streak off. But his main fear was, you know, what was my body going to look like? Was it going to be all charred? And, you know, that could be a pretty grisly sight, you know. In the movie, they made a big deal out of not being able to find the right place, but it was no problem because when Mike took off, he spun the tires on the truck. He was, you know, frantic to get out of there, and it dug a trench in the road, and and Mike said he saw my footprints going up towards the clearing, but my body wasn't where it had fallen. They said I guess they all got out maybe at the same time or something, and said they were like shoulder to shoulder and calling, but they were huddled around one flashlight, and it was kind of a maybe false security of staying close to the light. But they said they were calling and searching, and at one point, Mike, had been, stayed pretty strong up to that point. They said he fell to his knees and was crying. He felt a lot of guilt that he had taken off, but I really think that was the smartest thing for him to do. He was responsible for the safety of the entire crew. And when they saw that blast of energy hit me, they were certain it had killed me. They said that they had yelled that amongst themselves, that it was so obvious, that it was so brutal, and the way my body tumbled through the air, landed all limp, that it had been fatal. They just knew it was that I had been killed at that point. So it would make no sense to risk anyone's life additionally to save somebody they think is already dead. My family's criticisms notwithstanding. But when they got back and Mike finally, got a grip on himself, and Kenny helped him up, and Kenny, surprisingly, he was kind of the more quiet, soft-spoken member of the group, but he sort of took charge, I gather, from what they said. Once Mike broke down, and when they got back to town, they had argued all the way there on what to do. Report it, get help first. Alan didn't want to involve the police until they'd organized their own search. But some of the others were pointing out that, hey, if Travis is never found, we don't report it, how's that going to look, So they opted to call a sheriff when they got to town, and so it was Kenny that made the call, and the local deputy came in, and he reported that, some of the guys were still crying. It was obvious that something really serious had happened. Deputy called at the main office, and the sheriff and the second in command came down in person, and that's a 30-mile drive. But they were all really struck with the way these men were totally shooken up, and they knew something terribly serious had happened. But when somebody said something about, well, he might be dead, we don't know, that got their attention. Well, if somebody thinks he might be dead, maybe this is some kind of a crazy cover story. Maybe somebody got murdered out there, and they're trying to explain a disappearance. So unlike in the movie where they didn't go back that night, the sheriff and his men did go out and make a bit of a search, and then the really big search was the next day and the days following. They had over 50 men on foot, on four-wheel drives. I don't know, maybe some of those off-road vehicles, but they said the men on horseback that some of the horses were behaving a bit strangely, and one of them bolted and took off and got lost in the woods. So I don't know how long it took them to find that horse, but they had the the terrain gridded out by the sheriff's plan was to have all these searchers within sight of each other, moving in a straight line and crisscrossing the area, looking for any kind of sign, clothing, footprints, blood. My oldest brother was out there, and he tore apart some of the piles that the men had made, thinking that maybe they had put my body under one of those piles of wood. And he was pretty hostile to the crew. He was pretty suspicious of them. There was a little violent confrontation over his suspicions. But the men were steadfast. What we saw was what we saw. And there were other confrontations between searchers and the crew, and they would very loudly, saying, "No, we'll take any kind of test you want. Give us truth serum, sodium pentothal, lie detector, whatever. We're telling the truth." And so, sheriff took him up on it, and he brought in the state police polygraph expert. This was a former Department of Public Safety officer who had gotten special training for the polygraph, in addition to his, experience and training as an interrogator. And he went in, expecting to discover that somebody had murdered Travis and hidden the body, and the others were somehow covering up for it. And much to his surprise, the men passed the test. And when he relayed that information to the sheriff was very much taken aback. But this story hit the news media worldwide, and within just a very few amount of time, there were camera crews from England or Japan and all over the United States, and it was a kind of a really high pressure sort of situation. The men said that when they went to take their lie detector test at the jail, at the courthouse, that there was just horde of reporters clicking, flashing cameras in their face and everything, and calling out things. And the crew was under constant pressure from townspeople accusing them of murdering me, and knowing that if anything went wrong with their testing, that they were going to jail, they weren't going home. And so at the time that the test had been conducted, the president of the American Polygraph Association, this pretty big organization, said that although no single polygraph test is 100% perfect, when you have 6 people passing tests on the same issue, the mathematics works out to where the odds would be over 1,000,000 to 1 of there being any kind of an error in the testing in that kind of a situation. And that was with 6 tests. But now that there's been 16 past tests in connection with this incident, even the current president of Polygraph Association seconds that opinion that, there's just no way that many tests are going to be wrong. And this wasn't a close-knit group of people with long associations. One of the guys had only been on the crew 3 days, and I've, over the years, taken and passed 5 different polygraph tests from 3 different examiners of the highest qualification. All 3 of these examiners were people who had years of law enforcement experience. I should probably take the opportunity to say that I was tricked into going on a so-called lie detector show that claimed that I was lying, but it was the show has been attacked by a group called Global Polygraph as being a total fraud before I was ever on the show, saying that the methods used were no way could you get anything better than coin flipping. So, and then the top three experts in the world have seconded that opinion that there was absolutely no way you could get any accurate testing. In that circumstance, the examiner is paid by the show, and his job is to keep them from having to pay any prize money. So, his job was to just call everybody a liar, which he did. Nobody ever passed on that show. Oh, except Kenny Peterson. He was on the show for some reason. They said he was telling the truth. Now here he's the witness, and they saying he's telling the truth, but I'm not. So it was kind of weird. But I probably shouldn't even be bringing that silly thing up. But there's been a lot of false things said over the years. Some of it from skeptics or debunkers who wanted to discredit the incident any way they could, dig up dirt on people, and say things that just flat weren't true. Come up with theories that were supposed to explain it, but were subsequently totally disproved. The number one detractor was a debunker who had written several books discrediting the idea that there are any UFOs at all. And come to find out, after he passed away, I came into possession of his FBI file. Come to find out, he had been under investigation by the FBI for revealing classified information to the enemy. I mean, they'd had looked into whether he had purchased radio transmitting equipment to his house, and they actually called him irrational and some other things. Their assessment of him from the top law enforcement agency on the planet was pretty negative, and totally discredits his credibility. Every single theory that he came up with to try to explain this away was solidly disproved in a variety of ways. And it was always frustrating for the entire crew to be constantly under suspicion, and people, even after you pass a lie detector test, they're still coming up with these theories and trying to say things, and people who were afraid of this phenomena and want to find a reason not to believe it will just glom onto any little thing that they can use to justify their disbelief because it makes them feel better. And one theory was that this was all a drug hallucination. Well, there's a couple of major points that make that absurd. One, 7 men are not going to experience an identical hallucination, down to every last detail. And drug hallucinations don't leave behind physical evidence either. We'll get to that in a minute. And the other glaring hole in that theory was that I had blood and urine samples run through the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's drug screen, which proved there was no trace of any drug in my body. There was a red mark on the inside of one of my arms that that the debunkers were trying to say that was proof that I had been injecting hallucinogens. But my understanding of that type of drug is that nobody injects hallucinogens anyway. So the doctor noted in his report that the red mark was not over any major blood vessel anyway. But you go right down the line, the theory that this was all a story made up to get Mike out of his logging contract. Well, first of all, it could not have got him out of his contract. When the contract was terminated, because he had no crew, the incident wasn't even discussed, wasn't even brought up. And, Mike obtained signed affidavits from the contracting officers, 2 of them, asserting that there's absolutely no way such a story could have benefited Mike in regards to his contract, and in fact, was detrimental. But it was just theory after theory. One debunker was claiming that I was really hiding in some cabin somewhere. Well, when I was returned, I made a call from a phone booth, and it was a collect call. And although it was illegal, the operator, hearing this extreme emotion, listened in on the call and reported it to the sheriff, who sent an officer over there to investigate. So there was the proof right there that that's where I was, not somewhere else. And nothing like hard evidence to undercut a beautiful theory, that doesn't fit with so many other kinds of evidence. We talked about evidence that was discovered at the site. During the search, some UFO investigators discovered anomalous magnetic readings at the site, and including a polarity reversal in the direction the craft had departed. Well, there was also some high radiation readings discovered during the search. The men's hard hats registered double that of a radium dial watch that was on site, and 4 times background radiation. And I think it was unfortunate that a lot of follow-up just didn't happen in time to, get crucial evidence while it was still fresh. My brother did have the presence of mind to take the clothing that I was returned in, put it in a sealed bag for later examination. But this was put into the trunk of a car, and a bunch of stuff was thrown in on top of it. The bag was torn open, and it was contaminated, and there was just no follow-up. It was all, defense against this barrage of accusations that, this was just what do they call it, a transitory psychosis, that I had gone temporarily insane and hallucinated an alien contact. And that's the reason I was able to pass a lie detector test. I believed it was true, but it didn't really happen because I was really crazy. Well, what doesn't fit with that is, again, 7 men are not going to have an identical hallucination. I was examined by a team of psychiatrists, and I underwent a battery of psychiatric tests that, resulted in a totally normal pattern of scores. But it was really hard on everybody to be under this constant barrage of suspicion and accusation from people who had no facts. That was weird. They would come up with these theories. Well, he's got to be just crazy. Well, it doesn't fit. But it doesn't fit with any of the facts. Don't bother me with the facts. Even people who say, well, it can't be aliens. There is no such thing as aliens, so it's got to be demons. They'd rather believe in a supernatural demon than a perfectly physical, normal being from a neighboring planet. there's so much evidence over the years. At the time, it was pretty easy for the skeptics. They had the high ground at that time. Anybody who believed that there were aliens was a kook. And they all little smart remarks about little green men and tinfoil hats and that sort of thing. But now, with the Hubble and Kepler telescopes, by direct observation, we know that there are planets going around other stars. And, just last year, or year before last, NASA come out with the conclusion that virtually every star, most of the normal stars, have about a dozen planets going around them, which, they used to have a formula called the Drake equation, estimating the number of civilizations in the galaxy. Well, with this new information about the number of planets, the values in that equation are enormously, exponentially greater than they were previously. And they've been able, with spectral analysis and that sort of thing, to determine that chemistry out there in the universe is pretty much like it is on Earth, and all those molecules exist. And then when you've got 10 planets going around a star, there's something they call the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold. So the planet isn't burning up by being too close to the star, and not too far away, so it's just basically freezing. There's an optimal distance, and on those stars, where the planet in the middle is of the right size and composition, you basically got estimations of Earth-like or life-supporting planets to be a very, very, very large number. And that's just in the abstract, in the theoretical. The fact that the Pentagon recently admitted that they were aware that this was real and had been researching this and had a lot of observation from many, trained military personnel, pilots and whatnot, and even has possession of material from a crash that is being analyzed. So it's you would expect that revelation of that, or that admission at this point, would have created a bigger stir than it has, but it's still pretty amazing that we have that confirmation finally. It is real. This did happen. It's a really long and involved analysis when you get into every possible scenario to try to explain it away, and how undeniable, verifiable facts disprove these theories. The experience was extremely traumatic, and it pushes us all to broaden our perspective on our place in the universe, and the nature of existence and all that kind of stuff. It really makes us push the envelope, and some people see the existence of life on other planets to somehow be a threat to their religious views, but I think that's absurd. There's absolutely nothing about that. I mean, to me, from a religious perspective, I think they're selling God short, to say, well, he's only got created one little planet with these people on it, and all those billions and billions of points of light we see in the sky at night are just something he put up there to twinkle at us in the night sky, and it's totally devoid of life. I think that is what we would define as a kook. A kook, to me, in this day and age, is someone who believes we're alone in the universe. Those are the kooks. Those are the people who are crouching in a frightened way, hiding behind, some really silly sorts of beliefs, because they don't want it to be true. They don't want that to. They find it frightening, and I was terrified. I was terrified out of my mind. It was a frightening experience in my life. I don't think I could ever experience anything that frightening ever again. And I've been in some pretty hairy situations in my life, but nothing compares to that. But I think because I was coming from the point of view that where all these disbelievers are, that they find this frightening. And over, decades of thinking about this, I realize it's not necessary to be scared, that it's my personal belief that if they had any sort of sinister intentions for Earth, it would have happened a long time ago. And with a technology that, is far, vastly beyond ours, if they wanted this planet, we'd never know what hit us. It'd already be over with. The idea of, there being dogfights with military jets in our skies with these craft is absurd. They would obviously have ways of eliminating the humans if that was their goal. I don't believe that, and there's a lot of evidence filtering through that they're actually benevolent. A lot of people are very negative on the government's secrecy about this all these years. But you can't blame them. Look at the attitude that people had, To them, it was all crackpot stuff, And plus, they're in a, sort of a arms race with other countries concerning high-tech stuff. And so it became secret just because the potential use of this material or this science to gain the upper hand in a global struggle. You can't blame them for keeping quiet about it, and for other reasons. Is it really in our best interest? One of the things that made people conclude that the aliens must have sinister intention is that they're not just landing on the White House lawn and saying, here we are. Well, they haven't done that, but there have been situations where when they were spotted, they were attacked, But I doubt that's their reason for remaining cloaked, or I should say semi-cloaked, semi-hidden, sort of elusive. I believe with their technology that they would be capable of doing everything they're doing here and remaining completely undetected. I think these glimpses that we're getting is a sort of a gradual accustomization, a gentle awakening. And perhaps our government was kind of going along the same lines. This thing that was created in science fiction, something called a prime directive or non-interference directive, where you can't expose more lesser developed societies to this high-tech stuff because it's going to be harmful to their development or whatever. The sudden addition of technology is maybe not in our best interest. I mean, look, everybody thinks, oh, wouldn't it be so cool if we had 0 point gravity or energy, free energy or whatever? But the world economy is dependent on petrodollars, and I really am skeptical that just to overnight jerk the rug out from underneath all that wouldn't be massively destructive. I mean, there could be worldwide revolutions and economic collapse and all kinds of things just on that one thing. Say nothing of a host of other sorts of topics that people aren't they haven't thought it through. They're not ready for this, but they need to get ready because it's coming, whether you like it or not. And I think perhaps the Pentagon, releasing this information recently, is aware that it's time to wake up, people. This is real. But I would like to encourage people to get away from this wowie zowie sort of sci-fi. They build them into something as frightening as it's not like supernatural. They're not supernatural. It's super science maybe, but they're just when I say this at talks around the world, just think of them as those people from way over there that we don't know too much about. People actually kind of seem disappointed about that, like they sort of liked the wowie zowie supernatural. It wasn't helpful that Hollywood always or predominantly chose to depict aliens as basically invading monsters. They were horrendous in their appearance, and notice how they're almost always naked. That way they get to show this bizarre anatomy, and that's more of the monster take on the whole thing. And constantly being the invading monster is sort of programmed the public to respond in a negative way, and sort of encourage this attitude that people choose to not believe because it's too frightening to believe that. But better wake up and accept that it's real. But it's not as frightening as you think it is. It's going to be a lot of changes. It's going to be some pretty dramatic effects on societies. But you can run, but you can't hide. There's only one planet, and we're on it. One planet Earth, I'm saying. Hollywood has really missed the boat. When you have the concept of civilizations out there, just anything's possible. The numbers of storylines that they could come up with is infinite, without having to constantly go back to the same tired invading monsters kind of thing. I know there's a few exceptions like E.T. or Starman or like that, but there's been, the predominance thing has been some pretty horrendous stuff with the alien thing. Don't forget Superman was an alien. Fiction, of course, but there's a few positive takes on it. Someday, I would like to see a remake of Fire in the Sky to tell it more accurately, and to sort of share with people the realizations that I've come to over the years. I've gotten a huge number of emails and letters and what from people from all over the world who would love to see a remake that would be more true to the actual story. And it's been quite a transition for all of us. It had profound effects on all seven of us. And for me, it's been a long, probably, if anybody, the hardest to accept the idea that this wasn't even an abduction, that it was more of an ambulance call. that I was injured by an accidental discharge, and the only entity in a position to save my life was them. Had the crew been heroic enough to somehow retrieve my body and try to get to the nearest hospital, over an hour away, whether it was Payson or Sholo, I would have died. I would have been remained in a fatal status. So I think it was a good thing that they took me aboard and did the revival, the resuscitation. Now there was a theory about what were they doing there, you know. Some of the guys on the crew say, "Oh, they were there waiting for us. They had their eye on catching Travis." You know, I don't know about that. I was on a show here a while back called The Low Files, and there was a segment after mine about this lady that is into the lightning, and they were talking on that show about something called fulgumite or something, and as a segue for the show, the host of the show, Rob Lowe, said, Travis said that the aliens were in the area mining for fulgumite. Well, I never said any such thing. I had never heard of fulgumite before. But actually, it was kind of a lucky thing that he said that because, you know, we had investigated the idea of underground water sources, mineral deposits, the magnetic anomalies were investigated. There was even a government crew that was observed to be doing that after the incident happened. And trying to find any possible reason that they were there really come up with nothing very compelling. But this fulgumite thing is the best theory yet. I didn't make the theory, but fulgumite is a substance that's formed when lightning strikes the ground and the extreme voltage and extremely high temperatures melts the minerals together. And, you know, they have these rock and gem shows where it's kind of a sort of a crystalline branching sort of a formation, kind of sort of like the shape you see in the sky when lightning bolt, you know, kind of a forked and jagged thing. It sort of looks like that down into the ground where these minerals have been melted together. Well, it's possible that fulgumite could be something that could be quite useful to them. That the rock and gem people, you know, claim that these crystals have unique properties, and with that extreme voltage and extreme temperatures, these substances are formed that cannot be formed geologically. And the reason that is such an appealing theory is because the Mogollon Rim area right there has the highest recorded number of lightning strikes of any place in the continental United States, except for the Everglades. The Everglades is higher, but you know that's water, so you're not going to get fulgumite there. So it's basically the highest frequency of lightning strikes of any place in the United States. So if there's some unique property to this material, some people said, "Oh well, the aliens, they got high tech, they could create anything, all without having to find it." Well, I don't know, you know. Why do that if nature creates it, you know? And here's another thing. When the lightning does hit the ground, the sand particles that are melted together vary on the place. You know, there could be unique combinations of minerals that when they're hit with this extreme high voltage of the electricity and the melting at the same time, might not be very easily duplicated. And why bother if you've got a natural source? Um, so, I thought it would be interesting to try to find some fulgumite out there. Um, Kind of grateful to the theory coming up that way. I never said it, but because I'd never heard of fulgumite, but it's a dang good theory, and good as any. I don't know what else. I'm not fond of the idea that they were sitting there waiting for me. um, I got out and went, and there was a couple of the guys on the crew that said it looked like I was in a trance when I got out, and they think I was under the aliens' thought control, mind control. And I said, no, it felt like my own impulse, I wanted to see them up close. I was curious, and maybe a little touch of showing off for the crew, especially when they became so alarmed at me doing this. But they counter with, well, if they have mind control, they can make you think it's your own idea. And so, that's kind of hard to argue with, but it sure seemed like my own idea at the time. There's a lot of developments and refinements of analysis, just trying to make sense of it over the years, trying to figure out not just the motives behind the aliens, and but also learning a lot about people. A lot of these investigative people, astronomers, scientists, the law enforcement, the military, all sorts of these things that, and just the lay public and their reaction. I learned a lot about people and how they deal with things they want and do not want to be true. And it's a rare person who's untainted by biases of that sort, who don't perceive things in terms of what they wish were true instead of what the evidence points as being most likely. I think if you're ready to ask some questions, I can.
Oh yeah, by all means. And wow, in the last 3 hours I've been doing this show, I have maybe only gotten amount of words out, not excluding what I'm saying now, that can be counted on two hands. My last guest set a record for the most time talking without me speaking. I was thinking maybe you may do the same thing, but some people get pissed off when I filibuster my guests. So hey, it's nice I was able to give you the floor, and I have some things prepared and all that. Well, first of all, the whole thing about, before we get into the ET UFO stuff, the whole idea of the polygraphs and whether they are valid. I mean, love him, hate him. Alex Jones of InfoWars, I've heard him assert at least twice that polygraph tests are totally fraudulent, totally fake, and whatever the results are don't mean squat. Well, if he's right, then that means that all the things you said about your pals taking polygraphs and you taking polygraphs, it's all meaningless because they're frauds from the start, and the only reason they decided to say you were innocent was, well, maybe because that's what your body language suggested, and there really wasn't any way to prove that you were lying. So I don't
Well,
know.
the problem with Alex Jones' theory is that it's not backed up by scientific research. This has been researched at the university level, at the government level. It's been investigated by the United States Senate, the Israeli Knesset, the Canadian, at the very highest levels. The polygraph is highly regarded because they find out that it works. It's not foolproof. It's not 100%, but it's a very useful investigative tool, and especially in a situation where you have multiple witnesses all on the same issue. An anomaly can occur where there's what do they call those people? Pathological liar. Might pass a test when they're lying, but for 7 random people to consistently pass multiple tests, is like they said, over 1,000,000 to 1.
Fair enough. Fair enough. If I ever see Alex Jones again, maybe I'll ask him directly. Where are you making the assertion polygraphs are fraudulent? But anyhow, well,
Yeah, but you see, there's anytime anybody puts forth a theory about something, there's only two real basic things you analyze: are your facts true, and is your reasoning valid? And people will just blab a bunch of stuff out, and is that a fact? Is that a fact? And they just say something like this is true, but it's not. I'm talking about peer-reviewed studies, university level, high-level scientific thing. The validity of the polygraph is well established as being the upper 90 percentile for any single test.
well, fair enough. Moving on in regards to helping people like you that had experiences like this better understand what the whole point of the whole thing was. There is a possible solution. I recently spent $1,000 to pay Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartas, who is my number one most used source by far in this show, to channel my past history from a soul life, soul contract perspective. And of course, his Akashic Records skills can answer almost any question under the sun, because the Akashic Records is the library of information that results in the matrix that we decode for all intents and purposes. So, did you ever think about maybe spending a couple grand or so on a 2-hour Akashic Records reader session to better find out why this happened to you, or do you prefer not to do something like that? And if so, why?
Well, is the Akashic record more recognized by somebody like Alex Jones or the scientific community than polygraph or some other sort of objective analysis that's been? See, when people, I travel the world, I talk to many people, and they'll say things, and I come back to, how do you know this? How do you know this? If this is a fact, what source can you point me to where I will be as certain of that as you are? Well, I'm not saying Akashic records aren't true, but how do we know they are? And I would like to look into that. And if I found that, evidence that it had been shown to reveal things that are consistently proven to be true by independently verifiable means, by all means, yeah, I would go for that.
All right, something worth looking into, and also something else worth looking into. I heard you talking about the whole Goldilocks zone idea, about how where planets got to be to have life. It seems like more people in the alternative research community are backing away from this and are thinking that we've been lied to about the nature of the universe and all. And this seems like the whole idea that nuclear fusion powers stars, that's greatly losing credibility. It's been argued that stars are more than likely comprised of some combination of electromagnetism and or scalar energy, and the universe is highly electromagnetic in nature. In my interview with John Lear, he talked about how the sun doesn't actually radiate heat. It radiates, stars are hotspots on the universal galactic web of energy, and they radiate the energy to the planets, which have their own consciousness filtering system, which is mostly prominent in the atmospheres of the planet, that convert the energy from the sun into a livable environment. And we've been lied to about this by science. And one thing that's greatly one of the important things about this is that it greatly adds to the credibility of there being life out in the universe, because if you follow the stars are probably nuclear fusion, you believe you got to be in the Goldilocks zone. Well, no, if you go by electric universe theory, it doesn't matter where the star is located. The energy from the stars or the sun or any star will just travel across this universal web of electromagnetic energy, and the planets will convert that into in a way that allows for life to be supported. And just yesterday, I want to point out, I was listening to an interview, not an interview, a session where Brad Johnson, who channels Adronis, while he was channeling Adronis said the gas giant planets that you see in the outer solar system, the outer appearance of those planets that you've been led to believe is as fact, is actually a veil. And then he said, let me say that again. The gas giant layer is a veil. And then he wouldn't elaborate on that further. He said, I'm going to let the human race research that more. And this wasn't really Brad Johnson talking. This was Adronis talking. Why Adronis wouldn't want to tell the human race what he meant by that. Well, I don't know, but what makes you think maybe the nature of a gas giant is what we're led to believe. The nature of the universe is greater and greater than we're led to believe, more complex, and there's more life out there. And this only adds credibility to the possibility of life coming to Earth because there's more of it out there because we live in an electric universe, as they say. So, anything you got to say about this idea?
Well, like I was saying, I travel around and I hear lots of theories about lots of things, and some of these things tend to be mutually exclusive. I mean, they can't all be true simultaneously because they contradict each other. And we get back to that. How do you know this? Where did you get this information? Where is a source of factuality or verification that will make me as certain as you are? It it might seem strange that somebody who's had an experience like mine would tend to be sort of looking for objective scientific approach to things, but when you're wondering, am I losing my mind? You're reaching out. What's real here? You look really hard at what can I know for sure. I probably became less religious, but more spiritual, if that makes any sense to you. But still, the things that we think might be true and that give us comfort and seem to fit together with a whole lot of questions we all walk around with. Go into areas that are just, it's kind of a personal thing, my beliefs and things that I hate to use the word cling to, but the things that I find comfort in might not be the same as someone else's, and far be it from me to criticize theirs or to subject my own to critique, because it's not the kind of thing that we can point to facts or reasoning. Those two troublesome things that I was referring to earlier, facts and reasoning.
Right, and other areas that where there's a lot of thought and a lot of reasoning and a lot of research that needs to be continued is we're talking about these aliens that, like, they're not maybe demons as some people assert, because there's no such thing as aliens. There's got to be demons. Well, okay, I don't know if anybody who thinks that way, because I mean, if you're crazy enough to believe in demons, then why wouldn't you be crazy enough to believe in aliens? Not that anybody who believes in that is crazy, because they exist, but that's kind of beside the point. The point is, these aliens and demons, where do they come from? You were alluding to the fact they're probably flesh and blood aliens, not demons as people assert. Well, is flesh and blood the proper way of looking at it? Because when I interviewed Eric von Daniken, I asked him about what he thinks about what I and some others, I'm sure, assert, that the ancient astronaut theory is a little too down to earth in some regards. That seems paradoxical and counterintuitive to think like that ancient astronaut down to earth. Well, what I mean is the ancient astronaut theory pushes the idea that these aliens were flesh and blood, when many of my folks, friends in the spiritual but not religious community assert that all aliens, or ETs, whatever you want to call them, come from other dimensions. Yes, they come from other planets, and yes, they also come from other times, because time is also an illusion. They can be time travelers, but that's kind of beside the point. The point is, all aliens are interdimensional. And even maybe humans, you could say the same thing. It makes sense to think of aliens and humans and whatever the race, ET, alien, whatever, classify them by what dimension they come from is the best way to do it. Not what planet they come from, not anything else, just what dimension. Some people use the word density, and some people debate whether there's a difference between dimension and density, but again, that's beside the point. Do you think that's an appropriate way of looking at it? Maybe all aliens are interdimensional. That's the way you should look at it, not so much what planet they come from or what universe they come from.
Well, um, definition of the universe is all it is. You know, everything, whatever's there, it's all of it. Now we're in our Milky Way galaxy, and then there's a certain percentage of those points of light that we see in the night sky that are not individual stars; they're actual entire galaxies. And the physics, with conventional Newtonian physics of travel from there to here, especially intergalactic travel, is most likely going to be something akin to interdimensional. There's all kinds of theories, wormhole string theory, all kinds of things in physics that they're trying to lay out scenarios where this sorts of thing can work. But if they are traveling from there to here, which I know they are, probably a very practical way, the theory about how they could overcome the limitations of supposed galactic speed limit would be interdimensional, which is, and if you consider time to be just another dimension, then sure, we already, are sort of bordering on what is called telepresence, the way we can almost be somewhere else in a virtual reality sort of situation. If you've ever, done 3D virtual reality stuff, it's amazingly real, and it is entirely feasible that these beings and their hardware, could come to us taking a shortcut, so to speak, by slipping into another dimension. That doesn't mean they come from another dimension. I think the interdimensional thing would be a sort of a transitional state. They actually are living on another planet, but when they want to come here, they got to slide into the dimension, take the shortcut, and come here. And perhaps when they come out on this end, they're flesh and blood again, but certainly had to be interdimensional or something akin to time travel to overcome the mathematical difficulties of the so-called galactic speed limit, the speed of light and that sort of thing.
Well, the speed of light, that's a very third dimensional thing, the speed limit. I mean, if you realize that we're not light, we're consciousness, and consciousness can travel anywhere, anytime, any place, because space and time are illusions, and consciousness can exploit that. Light can't, but consciousness can. Then, well, that's opens up a whole new can of worms as to how easy, I should say easy, not difficult, it would be to get from point A to point B in universe or in some timeline. But I digress. Want to talk a little bit about.
Well, one thing that was a point that was made here recently is, the physicist Michio Kaku was on television, and he says, people keep envisioning these alien beings, these alien civilizations, as being maybe a few hundred years ahead of us. But you have no idea. Just the conventional understanding of physics is that these star systems are not just millions, but perhaps billions of years ahead of us. And when you consider that virtually everything technological that we have has occurred in the last 100, maybe 200 years. And we've been here, tens of thousands of years, of course, but everything technological is just in the immediate past, in the big picture of things. So to try to imagine what sort of advances might be accomplished by beings that predate us by literally millions of years. And if our technology that would seem so remarkable to people, I mean, if you were to take a common cell phone and show it to somebody, even 40 years ago, you know, the Star Trek communicator was pretty exotic piece of hardware, and today it's just ordinary stuff. Uh, and certainly, much of the common uh, technology that we take for granted, um, even 100 years ago, would just seem like magic to those people. And so, if 100 years can do that, what would 1,000 years do? What would 10,000? What's about 100,000? The amount of change is something that we're going to, when we encounter it, it's going to be incomprehensible. It's so far beyond anything we can imagine. I mean, if we could even imagine it, we'd already kind of, in a way, have it. Uh, Even, I think it was like only about 100 years ago, maybe less than 200. Lord Kelvin, top scientist of his day, said that mankind would never be able to travel faster than 60 miles an hour. The conveyance, the air would be sucked out of it, and people would suffocate. So it would be fatal to travel faster than that. And this was the better minds. There's whole books written about the pronouncements of our most learned people, talking about what's not possible and how foolishly they were shown to be uh, proven wrong. And people are really limited in their thinking, picturing these civilizations to be maybe a few hundred years ahead of us, or that the technology that they've arrived at would be anything that they could begin to explain to us if they wanted to give it to us, which they'd probably be doing us a big favor not to try to give it to us. It's like handing the kids a box of matches and saying, "I'll go play." It's just not something that they're going to do if they're benevolent, that um, they would do. And the idea that that aliens are some kind of nefarious plotting to take over the earth and eliminate humans is absurd. I mean, they've been aware of us before we were technological. When we were running around throwing spears and throwing rocks, and that was the height of our technology, they were aware of us then. How much easier it would have been to eliminate us at the time. Simple things. They could just, cook up an organism that would create a plague that would eliminate all humans. Boom, we're gone. It doesn't have to be anything as esoteric as some of these theories have. So I find, the idea that they want the Earth to take it away from us is, I'm just a real skeptic about that one.
Oh, so I take it you don't really subscribe to the whole reptilian agenda thing that all the David Icke fans out there assert, like Queen of England's a lizard masquerading as a human, and so are many of our other political and corporate leaders. You don't really buy into that, do you?
Well, we go back to, how do you know this? You got to begin with, I'm open. I'm open-minded. I'll accept anything's possible. But for me to make the leap from merely accepting that it's possible to believing that it's true is, how do you know this? What are the facts and what are the reasoning that are going to make me as convinced of that as you are? So I haven't seen any evidence for it, but it might be true.
Yeah, another thing that might be true is like maybe the relationships between supposed species of gray and supposed species of reptilian. And I want to get back to your specific case. You got a good look at the people that were, I don't know if abducted is the right word to use. They weren't really abducting you because you said you thought it was an ambulance call, and well, then they weren't abducting you. But the point is, did you get a good look at them? Can you again reiterate what they look like based on, well, if you weren't able to see them at the time of the experience, what about any maybe hypnosis sessions you did after that, if they were?
Well, they were smaller than me, and that didn't keep them from being extremely frightening to me, just because I was looking into a conscious, sentient face that was seen, and um, it was terrifying because of just the difference, and I had been as indoctrinated with the aliens as monsters things as anybody. So short, large head, hairless, very large eyes, not black obsidian eyes like some have described, but eyes that actually blink, actually had a pupil and an iris. Now, I personally have a theory that it's possible that the black eye thing came from the fact that they might need to protect their eyes from normal levels of light. What would be normal for us? Because any creature on the earth that has a very large eye lives in a low light environment. They either live in the deep sea or in caves, or they're nocturnal. And this huge eye gathers so much light that it could be extremely damaging. So that would make it necessary to have something that would be akin to what we call sunglasses. It would just be a cover over the eye to protect them from what levels of light we consider to be normal would be extremely bright for them. And if, I'm not saying that these aliens live in the deep sea or in caves or nocturnal. It's possible that they just live on a planet that has an extremely dense atmosphere that doesn't allow that much brightness into their normal day-to-day environment. There could be other reasons for low light, just the distance from their star or whatever. There's also, the tendency that people have to lump people together, to lump these creatures together, to call them the Greys. Any small, hairless, large-eyed creature becomes the Greys, and just assume that they're all of one group. Well, first of all, if you assume that they've been spacefaring for thousands of years or millions of years, it's possible that they migrated out from their home planet, differentiated. The whole story of Darwin and the Galapagos, and how these finches that began with a one basic species had differentiated just in these islands, just with the distance that separated them. They had evolved different beaks and different sorts of features to adapt to the environment that is on their particular island. And when they were originally all from one original stock. So it's possible, in my theory, and I'm just speculating, that a lot of what's lumped together as Greys are really different species, and maybe not even having a common original stock. I have a theory in biology. When you look around planet Earth and you see certain species that are quite similar to each other, even though they don't share a common ancestor or basic stock. As different as they are genetically, they come to look very much alike because of having a similar environment. Form follows function is the law in biology, that the environment shapes the creature, and that, that's the reason the American pronghorn, it's not even a true antelope, so much resembles certain species of antelopes in Africa. These parallel species evolved in the presence of cheetahs. The United States used to have cheetahs here, but they became extinct But the basic beginnings of the pronghorn was running from cheetahs. That's the reason they can do 70 miles an hour. There's other examples. In the Southwest, we have a javelina, also known as a peccary, and they look so pig-like. You know, a snout, tusks. Their whole anatomy is very pig-like, and they're not pigs. They're not related to pigs. They don't share ancestry at all. When people in Arizona go javelina hunting, they say, "Oh, I'm going pig hunting." They call them pigs, but they're not related to these wild boars at all. Although they look very much alike and they live in a similar sort of style, it's the environment that shapes the creature. The American flying squirrel has a very strong resemblance to the Australian sugar glider, which is actually a marsupial, which diverged from the mammalian line millions of years ago. But because these squirrel-like creatures are nocturnal, live in trees, and have similar feeding, and they've developed the ability to glide between trees and come to look alike because they live in a similar niche environmentally. Everything that comes to live in the water comes to look like a fish, even though they might be taxonomically completely different. A whale is a mammal, but what works shapes the creature. Two fins in the front, one big one in the back. That's what works in the water. They're not trying to be, their form didn't come from fish. They were four-legged creatures walking around on land before they went back in the sea and became very fish-like because that's what works. So sci-fi came up with all these alien creatures that are really bizarre in form. Some people say, well, Travis saw creatures with 2 arms and 2 legs and a head on top, which is what they call humanoid. That's what humanoid means, you know, basically 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head on top, and eyes in the front, like that. Well, we don't have to share any genetic commonality with the Greys for them to come to resemble us in a remarkable way. The skeptics said, well, if there was an alien, it would be like a cockroach or an octopus or whatever. No, not in something that makes a machine that can fly and travel and, you know, manipulates the environment, that sort of thing. The niche is what shapes the creature, and that's where the similarity in form comes from. Even the so-called Nordics, even the human-looking aliens, it's possible they came from an entirely different origin that has no connection to us, although that's possible too, just on the basis of form follows function. The environment is what shapes the creature. But again, all that stuff is just my own philosophy that I've had 45 years to think about.
Well, thank you for giving your take on that, and I'd like to now talk about the whole idea of how getting the ET and UFO stuff into our reality would in fact be a shock to a system, because you did point out that that's very much true. Like, interestingly, you pointed out the idea of giving an infant book of matches or something, because in that interview I was listening, that talk I was listening, where Adronis was being channeled by Brad Johnson, he was talking about how like the recent revelations about UFOs and such on the news and all, it's all part of a planned, and he's saying this, it's all part of a planned move to get disclosure out, but in really, really small baby steps of sorts, because he asserts that just getting out the whole kit and caboodle of the truth about UFOs and the truth about ETs visiting the planet is like giving a baby well, I don't remember the analogy he used, but he was about giving like a baby or an infant something, and you use the case of book of matches. And well, this is something I've found very disturbing, because it's very hard to swallow for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people that know the truth, or researched what appears to be the truth, that the reason you can't just disclose everything all at once is because too many humans are on planet Earth are not prepared for it. Not just from a standpoint of like being too negative in their everyday things because the truth is too hard to swallow, but also the realization that like well, let me point out this way. Andrew Bartzis, he gives insights. He talks about every so often in emails, and he talked about a 2004 timeline genocide that happened in another timeline where there actually was disclosure, and there was all the revelations were made by the news and saying, yeah, the ancient astronaut theorists were right, the ET conspiracy theorists and the UFO nuts, they were right all along, and yeah, ancient astronaut theory is true. There were ETs in the past, and ETs actually showed themselves. Disclosure happened entirely, and then for all intents and purposes, society fell apart. People stopped living their lives, and everyone's like, what's the point in living when everything we've been told is a lie, and this technology that could make oil and stuff like that obsolete and get rid of money and everything. Well, what's the point of living life? Well, that they don't want that to happen in this reality here in 2008. So they just take it incrementally, bit by bit. And what really grinds my gears about this is the fact that many of us will either be dead or be old men with beards or old women with wrinkled faces and all that when 2050 or so comes, because that, according to Brad Johnson, when he be getting the info from Adronis, is when based on the current state of affairs, the current probabilities of how people will wake up over time, 2050 would be the time period when disclosure of the magnitude that caused people to lose touch with reality in another timeline in 2004 will happen. Well, in this reality, in this timeline, we have to wait till 2050, and that made me do a double-faced palm. Why? I'm going to be an old man and I had to wait this long, and I've gone through all this trouble doing a radio show like the one I'm doing with you now, and I'm going to have to wait that long for this stuff to finally come out simply because the mainstream media, which lies some more, and lies even when telling the truth or do it good, just like the government, won't get the truth out. Very hard to
Well,
swallow.
yeah, they do lie to us constantly. I mean, you know, the media is not something you can just rely on and take a. It's very disappointing, but I'm glad I've woken up to that. You've got to take it all with a grain of salt and go back to what's a real fact, what's a real something that I can verify here, you know. But yeah, it would have devastating consequences. We don't need to go to timelines or anything like that to realize, you know, that that sort of infusion of understanding would just be so disruptive to some real fundamental institutions, you know, demonologists, for example. But, you know, the prime being that the world's economy is based on oil and the whole energy production in that regard. To have that all become obsolete overnight would just, I mean, there would be revolutions, people would die, it would be, but that's just the beginning. There's just all sorts of things that would instantly become obsolete would, you know, be extremely disruptive. It would be turn everything on its head. The political systems, the you know, religious, philosophical, that right down the line would just be people would just be so stunned trying to cope and adjust with that.
And
So
that's why we have to.
what I'm saying is it's in our best interest that this be appropriately gradual. You know, so it wasn't necessarily some evil plot that the government's not delivering all this. They just realized how much harm it would do to let us have it all at once. So, and the same thing on the part of the aliens themselves. They've been in neither extreme. Not landing on the White House lawn and saying, here we are, greetings, Earthling. But at the same time, I'm saying with their technology, they could do everything they're doing here and remain completely undetected. I believe that the sightings and the contact that we have is chosen. It's deliberate, it's gradual, and to a purpose for our benefit.
Yes, and well, I'm sure I'll die a happy man when I die, knowing that disclosure happened in my lifetime. But It took too long as far as I'm concerned, but that's just easy
Well,
for me
it's
to say
already
because I'm,
happening, and
yes,
don't be surprised if it accelerates.
right, right. Okay, so moving on, switching gears. In regards to maybe getting, not just maybe talking to Akashic Records readers about getting the truth behind what exactly happened to you and other abductees and such. The per individual or individuals type of individuals that could help you with that are, well, other people in the well the not the abductee but the contactee community. One person who I wow, can't believe I'm mentioning his name right now, Ray Kusalandich. Yeah, he's left a lot of bad taste on a lot of believers' mouths, saying, among other times when I interviewed him in 2014, that in 2017 there's going to be a consciousness transformation, and we're all going to have crystalline bodies. And yeah, January 1st, 2018 is come and gone, and we're still carbon-based flesh and blood. So he's got a lot of explaining to do, but he seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth. But I digress. Anyway, the reason I bring him up, he is known, among other things, for having compiled a documentary program of all his with Alfred Weber is a good source where he did this with pictures of the ETs that he's met and the craft that they come in. And I'm thinking, okay, people that have been abducted or had close encounters with ETs, perhaps you could use him as a source to determine, like, if you know what the craft look like that you were taken into, maybe, and you know what the aliens look like, then maybe you could put two and two together and look in the book made like by Riku Solanich or anyone else who has gone through the trouble or hired someone who's an artist to do this to draw pictures of what the ETs look like and what their craft look like. And okay, maybe this is just one way to determine who abducted you. And well, you can speak to the contactees about what these specific ETs' intentions are. Maybe you might get a better idea of why they took you into their craft if you know what their intentions are. So these people that like Riku Solanich who have um, med know what their craft look like and have hired artists to draw pictures for them. Would you consider these to be potentially good sources for you and all the other people who need answers regarding who the ETs were and what their craft looked like that abducted you?
No,
Really?
and it's not that I'm in any way, criticizing any one particular person's. I just don't comment on any particular case that I haven't personally investigated. I took huge offense at people passing judgment on my case when they were so poorly informed they didn't even know. The original attack from our debunker had us as 3 men riding in a car rather than 7 men in a truck. And they were already negative. They were so hazy on the facts, but they're already negative. So, I don't want to be guilty of that. But in traveling the world and hearing thousands of stories, there are some that I believe and some that I do not. I think that they're either making it up in line or more likely believe it's true, but it's just, suffering some kind of delusion because so many of these things are mutually exclusive. Can't both be true. And so how am I going to, stake judgment on something that I can't verify? And to be fair to anyone, I would need to look very deeply and examine in a variety of ways. Some of the people that you mentioned, I've never heard of them, and maybe people that have never heard of me. But I've just, throughout my experience, I hear lots of stuff, and I learn things by osmosis, sort of. People come up and tell me things, but you might find it curious that I didn't, feel a compulsion to want to research and get out there in the field and scrape through all these accounts. But I've had my hands completely full trying to fully examine my own case. There's all kinds of investigative leads that I'm still following up on. The physical evidence, the other kinds of things, connections with the government involvement, all kinds of stuff that I'm still working on. After evidence afterwards, and that's the one thing I do know. That's the one thing I can rely on is what I know, what I've experienced personally. And I know that's it's disappointing to some people. They think I have a lack of curiosity. No, I have enormous curiosity. I want to know this stuff, but there's a lot of confusion that can come from trying to rely on things. The debunkers, the skeptics, the people who poo-poo the whole idea that there could ever be any aliens whatsoever, and they'll stand there on television and say, there's absolutely no evidence that this happened. What? Well, the Pentagon contradicts that now. But they love to point to a particular person who makes predictions and stories and things and then gets disproved, and they shot him down. So basically the debunkers love a case that they've essentially disproved, and they try to say, well, if I disproved one, I've disproved them all, which is illogical. Some are true, some aren't.
And these skeptics and debunkers, you can't possibly believe that they're so flat out stupid that they don't realize that the stuff they're trying to debunk is real. That Rich raises the question, well, why are they continuing to be debunkers? Are they being paid by someone to do that job? And if so, who is paying them, and what agenda do the people have that are paying them that would cause them to have to keep UFO and ET encounters under wraps? Who are these skeptics and debunkers? Who are they going along to get along with for the sake of misleading humanity? And for that matter, how can we get the debunkers to stop going along to get along with the conspiracy to discredit people like you? Any ideas, any solutions, possibly?
Well, to apply the rules of logical discourse and critical thinking, they claim that as their standard. This is the rule we live by, but bullshit. Those are the kooks. They are beginning with a conclusion and then looking for ways to prove it, quote unquote, prove. I think there's various categories. There's some that are actually working on behalf of the government to suppress acceptance of this, tamp it down. There are others who are simply opportunists. They perceive there's a need with a certain segment of the population that are frightened of this. They want to simplify their world. So they want someone to validate their belief that there's nothing to this. And so they can sell books to these people and sort of ride the coattails of that particular segment of society that just wants somebody to tell them, never mind, go back to sleep. There's no boogeyman. There are some others that ardently believe that it's demonic or ungodly or in some way like that, So there's all different kinds. And, some of them are just kind of like arrogant and egotistical. They know all that there is to know, and if that's not part of their belief, then they delight in saying everybody is stupid but me,
All right, and I guess one more question.
Anyway, but your final question was, what do we do about this?
Yeah, solutions.
I think critical thinking. Critical thinking. I plan on mounting a campaign in the future that you cannot graduate from school. When I was in high school, nobody could graduate from high school unless they had a civics course. I think they must have done away with that because you see these man in the street interviews where they say, "Who is this a picture of?" And it's like the vice president or something, and they go, "I don't know." People that are so clueless about our system of government or what's going on in the world, they probably know all of the rock stars and fashion brands, but these are people who just don't think. So we, as an aside, we probably should go back to requiring people to be able to pass a course in American government before you could leave high school. But I'd say if you don't graduate from high school with having had a class in critical thinking, you haven't been educated.
Well, can you actually trust the school system to not brainwash people? I don't think so. But
Well,
that's
they're
another.
already doing
Yeah.
that. They're
Okay.
already doing that. But that's the thing about critical thinking.
Right.
It's supposed to make you immune to that brainwashing kind of stuff.
Right. Of course. Um, and in regards to like the human race and dealing with this stuff, I guess I got one more question for you, and then maybe I guess we'll call it a night. Again, I haven't advised cut down the time of my interviews from 2 hours to a little bit shorter, but get an increased view count. But anyhow, the idea that there'll be some sort of a staged alien invasion. Stuart Swerdlow, I interviewed him, classic interview, one of the most classic interviews I did on this show. He asserted that there are plans by the powers that be to stage an alien invasion. And I told him, okay, you realize there's a lot of people that would be scoffing at the idea of this because it's not like 2001 where they can stage a false flag crashing planes into buildings and everybody believes it. No, it's not like that anymore. You can't get away. The government can't get away with staging something because too many people are awake now. How are they supposed to stage an alien invasion and get away with it without humans waking up to it? Stuart Swerdlow, after I asked him that question, his response was, "Oh, they get away with it because humans by nature are stupid." And will believe it. Okay, simple. He elaborated on that, but do you actually think there may be something in the works about a staged alien invasion, and if there was one, hypothetically, are humans too stupid and they'd believe it if the mainstream media told them that's what it was?
Well, I am very doubtful of that. Like you said, people are way too awake for that, for it to work, and nobody can keep a secret. And it's kind of disappointing. We're finally getting a degree of disclosure, and they're spoiling it all by saying this is all, uh, uh, you know, preparation for false flag. Well, they haven't said anything that is untrue or anything. So, you know, um, this whole false flag thing is just being carried a little bit too far. Um, oh, dang, there was something I was going to say, and I lost my
Lost
train
your
of
train of
thought
thought,
there.
huh? Well, that's cool. Maybe it'll come back to you, but yeah, you're right. I think it would be a little too hard to get
Oh,
away
okay,
with.
okay. Here's where
Go
this
ahead.
comes from.
Yeah.
What I was thinking was the Pentagon plan was named something that used the word threat in the title. And people say, well, see, that's the proof right there. And I'm saying, no, wait a minute. This is Pentagon funding. How are you justifying to military people the money to look into this thing without, you know, uh, bringing it back to um, keeping the people of this country secure, safety, protection. That's their job. That's their whole mission in life. And so, in order to get the funding, you call it threat, and then it doesn't seem so silly. But uh, they have no idea what it is, so why would it be a threat? You know, if it was completely unknown and they're trying to find out what it is, why call it a threat? Well, to get the funding. That's simple enough.
Yes, it all goes back to the follow the money. Can't argue with that. So, Travis, I think I'll take the last few minutes now to let you get out anything you'd like. Maybe even talk about future events that you're planning to go to. Well, before I do that, I just want to say thank you for coming on and I appreciate your patience through this whole time zone confusion and Skype number confusion and all that. Glad we were able to work through it. But if
Yeah,
you,
we worked through it.
we would, you
One
maybe,
thing I would
yeah,
like to do is encourage people to just boycott these people who have co-opted my trade name. Uh, my book has been published under the name Skyfire Productions for 20 years, and somebody is now forming a conference. I had a conference that I formulated for a number of years. On the anniversary of my incident, I called it the Skyfire Conference. Well, these people are calling their thing the Skyfire Conference. What do they get off, borrowing a name like that? I think that's wrong. I think they're trying to capitalize on the association with my incident, and um, I'd just say don't go there.
Okay, thank you for that bit of info. So, yeah, again, I'm glad I got you on. Actually, to be honest with you, I was actually worried I wasn't going to be able to get you on because when you were calling in, I had to press the green answer button like 10 times for some reason with the mouse before it finally got you on. I don't know if the angels were with me or whatever when that happened, but I was getting kind of worried maybe the NSA was trying to keep us from
Who knows?
talking or something.
I wouldn't.
Okay,
Anything's possible.
right. Well, I'm also glad this snowstorm that came through my area didn't cancel the show, didn't cause a power
Yeah,
outage.
that's what I was wondering. I was wondering if the storm
Yeah.
messed things up.
Well, that wasn't the problem. Unfortunately, lost a friend at work today. One of the employees at my job got hit by a train when their car slid on the snow and crashed into the train. So, but
Wow.
she's in a
My condolences.
yeah, she's in a better place. So, and well, when one thing's for sure, when you and don't take this the wrong way, when you and all the other ET contactees pass away, you'll enter a high state of consciousness where you will get all your answers, and you will finally be able to know the truth as to what exactly happened to you and why it happened to you. But I did try to give you advice. There's better ways. If you don't want to wait that long till the day you pass away, you can talk to Akashic Records readers, and I mean, if you're willing to believe it, ET contactees. But hey, that's your prerogative. It's your money, and well, I wish you the best of luck on what you do today and the rest of your future endeavors, and good luck on your trek, be it down to Earth up with the aliens or wherever, Travis. It was a great show. Pleasure having you on. Take care.
Yeah, you
All right.
too.